There's an old saying, and this is really it: the possible has been done and the impossible will be done. I always say what I thought was state of the art 30 years ago now looks barbaric. And being on the cutting edge is one thing. Being on the bleeding edge is a whole different game. So what did it take to get me involved in technology in the first place? I would probably say I was born that way. Did I want to go into rock and roll production, or did I want to go to dental school? Why does that matter to me, I think? Why does it matter that I want to keep learning and do this? I can tell you it's not money. It's in the end, the only thing I have is my reputation and integrity. Leaders make the people around them better. Oh, I'm a practicing dentist. I do it 4 days a week. I see patients, as they call it, wet gloved. I do that all the time. I also lecture, write, consult, not for dentists per se, but for the companies that are developing products in the dental space. And that's what gets me going now, is looking at the greatest and latest technology. I just was talking to somebody the other day about a project that 15 years ago we tried to get off the ground, but the technology didn't exist to do what we wanted. And I'm talking to this company, and the CEO comes up to me and says, the only way this was possible was because a new chip was developed 6 months ago. So not all technology is always ready. You have to, in that whole R&D phase, is that technology ready? And sometimes we have technology that's promising too much, but can't deliver. But 10 years later, it has the ability to deliver what it promised years ago. And that was strictly because technology caught up to it. My mother always encouraged me. My mother always had my back. I elevate my mother to a level that no human could be. All right. I do not have a negative opinion or remember really anything of my mother. Even when she used a little corporal punish on me, I probably deserved it. So, that was one thing. My father liked to play with some of this stuff. He liked photography and some other things. And, I would play a little bit. I never would say I was totally encouraged, but I was never held back. It was just do what you thought you wanted to do. And how do you excel in what you're trying to do? And I think that's what was my mother, because when you have somebody that can stand behind you and has your back, it allows you to do things that you would never do otherwise, because fear would overcome those desires. So it's one of the things I've always imparted to my children, that I always have their back no matter what. And that allows them to try and do things. Think about when you learn to swim. When my daughter would jump into the pool and I'll catch you, and I didn't. All right. It wasn't that I was trying to be hard. It was just giving her the space to make a mistake, but knowing that somebody was there just in case. And those are the things that happen in everything I did. When I first started in computers, building them and putting them into my office, I broke so much stuff you can't even believe. But what happened was I had friends who knew how to fix it. And I'd make that phone call and go, hey, can you tell me what I screwed up? And they tell me what I screwed up, and I could fix it. And so always having that person to have your back allows you to make those mistakes. And those mistakes are what allows you to learn and grow. What I've been working on has changed significantly over time. The technology that's I looked at years ago is now significantly different. Plus, my role has been significantly changed. I went from an end user to consulting with companies to help develop the newest technologies in the dental industry. So I've seen this broad path that just keeps expanding. And now that we're into things such as AI and robotics, things are just growing at an exponential rate. So what did it take to get me involved in technology in the first place? I would probably say I was born that way. And the reason is that if you asked my mother, or, from a very early age, I used to take things apart. I always wasn't so good about putting them back together, but I always was taking apart things like the television. So there were all these little pieces, and then it started becoming hobbies that were, audio, video, electronics, home theater, home automation. So I've always been playing in this technology space, and I just think it came from within me. I never was discouraged about it because it just was always challenging. So my family, yes, they didn't like when I would take the television apart and couldn't put it back together, or I dropped the knob into the television and they couldn't change the channels. So those were things that really did upset my family. But then as it got further along into my career and I started doing lectures, it changed. And one of the things that changed was you had to balance, doing certain things because, you had a wife and kids and their lives, and everything has to change with that. But I always made the time, and it always was the challenge. And in many cases, some of these things became hobbies, not just vocations. And even I'm thinking back now, 25 years ago in home automation, when I was doing things that nobody was basically doing, we were just taking different products and trying to mend them together. They go, "It doesn't work, Dad. The house isn't working." And I get the feedback from the family that way. Or as I call it, when I'd be out on the road lecturing, I get tech support calls. "Dad, the remote isn't doing what I wanted to do." And then I have to walk them through how to either fix it or get it running, from some other city. But those were the little things. And as my daughter, my youngest, would say, "Dad, I don't turn lights off because you taught us we didn't have to, because the house did it for them." And those were things, that we laugh at now, but it's true to a large extent. I conditioned them not to do it because the house would do it for them. But when I got further into my career, it was that, it did take time. When I'm out on the road lecturing, it did take family time away. And you have to balance that. And that's something that's not always as easy as it sounds. Running out on a Thursday night to fly somewhere to do a lecture on Friday and try to get home Friday night, or red eye home on Saturday morning so you can go to the soccer game. That's the challenges. So what do I lecture about these days? Mostly now it's really digital dentistry and how AI is now in the dental world and how that is changing things. And that's making significant changes that people are just starting to understand. They've been using AI in some products over the years, but they didn't even know they were doing it. But now AI is just creeping into every piece of the dental business, from patient acquisition through revenue cycles, treatment decision making, and billing. A lot of this stuff will, in the coming years, is just going to be automated. Now, that doesn't mean that, the human piece to this disappears. AI still is not close to being perfect, but it can do tasks and other things that in speeds that human beings can't even approach. And that's the difference. We're looking at speed, which gives us hopefully better efficiencies. But then when we get into treatment, we're talking about being able to control something that no human can do. We cannot be that precise. We cannot do it. It's just not in our DNA. But what's in our DNA is the ability to program these AI algorithms to be able to do things that we can't. What we're doing now works, but what happens beyond that is that it takes a lot more time and effort, and we, in many cases, introduce the human failties, the things that we just can't do. None of us are perfect, and neither is AI, but there's a consistency that can be generated through AI that no human can do. No human's, hand is that steady. No human can process, that information that quickly. And that's where it's going to be the benefits. I just used an AI the other day on a patient that was referred to me, and they weren't sure what was going on. So I was told to do something. I started looking at it and I wasn't quite sure where to proceed. So I used an AI algorithm and it gave me information so that I could better treat that patient. And in this case, it avoided a surgical procedure. Vaporware, it's not always vaporware. It's that the whole idea was there, but we didn't have what we needed. We didn't have the tools to do what we wanted to do. And sometimes the road from A to B is not a straight line. It takes a lot of curves. There may be some dead ends. You may have to do some U-turns, but ultimately it gets you there. There's an old saying, and this is really it. The possible has been done and the impossible will be done. Because in a lot of cases, what I do today, some of which was impossible when I started my career. It couldn't be done, yet now it's done routinely. And I always say what I thought was state of the art 30 years ago now looks barbaric. And what's it going to look like 20 or 30 years down the road when I'm about ready to check out? And what will dentistry look like? What's the world going to look like? It's going to make it easier for everyone, both patients and the dentist, and running a dental practice. Because if many dentists have neck pain, back issues, and it's from constantly, now I'm right-handed, and I go, oh, you know what? I see the world like this. And it causes neck pain and headaches and things like that if you overdo it. I'm very lucky that my structure has survived the dental career, but many people's doesn't. And when we can get into things like robotics and dentistry, we're going to see that it's going to take careers and elongate them because they're not going to have to put their bodies on the line basically for it. And those repetitive movements will disappear. So what we're seeing is just the start of this evolution where, robotics and AI will help take dentistry to make it better for the dentist, more precise for the patient, which is for the patient's benefit, better diagnostics so earlier interventions can lead to better outcomes. Those are the things that we're starting to see. We had this stuff before, and it's always been an evolution. So how do I find out about innovations? Well, a lot of it is spending time in the right places looking for it, but a lot of it is sent to me. Now what happens is startups come looking for me because they're looking to get help. They want consulting. What does this product look like? How can I help develop it? So I've evolved into this niche. How do they know about coming to me in the first place is I gave myself a tagline many years ago, and it was America's Dental Technology Coach. And so if you start Googling some of these things, you will start to see my name pop up. I'm also was part of a consulting, I still am part of a consulting group. And then I branched out along with staying in that on my own. So I'm really just playing in all these different sandboxes, as I like to call it, and people come looking for me at the playground. So I started doing this with a company called Cellarin Consulting. We started doing a program almost 20 years ago called Best of Class. I was lucky. I got to do that with some great people, and some of them were even my lecture partners. And it's, some people have come and gone out of that group, but it was a really good basis. It taught me a lot. One of the things that I always thought was interesting was a conversation, and we had a Wharton MBA guy working for us, and I worked alongside of him, and I learned so much about the business parts of things. And one day he said to me, "Do you know how much dentistry and what I learned from you?" And it was a complete surprise because what we were doing wasn't really about that, but I felt really good that I was able to impart knowledge back to him the same way he imparted it to me. And growth never stops. As I call it, the day I stopped learning is the day they put me in the ground, because everybody you can learn from. There's something. Yesterday we did a whole lecture, And I watched people who have skills that I just admire. And that's something that's really important, is to understand that you learn from every single person, and every single person can learn from you. And that's kind of that drives me, is that what is that next thing I'm going to learn? So the question really is why does that matter to me? I think, why does it matter that I want to keep learning and do this? I can tell you it's not money. Money may be partly part of the thing, but what drives most people isn't money. It's a desire that's within them. They want to feel something. And sometimes it's people who are generous and they want to give back and they volunteer their time to organizations. Other people give back in different ways. My give back is trying to cultivate the new leaders into dentistry. I got lucky, all right? And sometimes people say, well, it's not all about luck. And I agree. Sometimes you create your luck, or fate puts you in those places. And then what decisions do you make that get you there? So with that, I think that that's a big piece of that it's an internal drive. And you can change, because think about your own hobbies. Sometimes you started out doing one thing and you morphed into something else, and you may come back to an old hobby, but you keep changing. And mostly hobbies are about learning. Even if it's dexterity things, whether it's knitting or my home automation, these hobbies let you do things and they teach you something, and they teach you skills. I do not know how to code, all right? That isn't a skill that I have. My daughters have it, but I don't have it. But I can go to them and go, how do I do this? Or if I have to write some snippets of code, now I can turn to AI or ChatGPT and go, how do I write this? It's not always accurate, but it gets me closer. And each time I can do that, I learn a little bit more. And it may not have anything to do with my vocation, but it teaches me things that I didn't know. And that's really the thing that drives, at least me, that I just want to keep learning. And I find it exciting when I see something new that may be coming into the market, and maybe I get a little bit of me that goes to help to make that happen. That's the drive.
Were you like that in, say, junior high school or grade school or high school?
High school when I was in high school, it wasn't so much about that. I mean, I was a good student. I wouldn't call it to ever say to you I was a great student. All right. I didn't have to work for a lot of my schooling career. I guess I was bright enough to kind of be able to regurgitate the information, but I wasn't the guy, and I'm still not the guy who can come up with all the ideas. I'm not that idea guy. I'm an implementation guy. And if you understand that if you can get the right people on a team, and that's an important part, it's the team. You take the best skills from each person, and the team gets to a higher level and can do things that none of them could do by themselves. So one of the things that happens, and one of the things I try and help with, is when you have the founders, all right, the people who start the company, what's their vision and what are they trying to accomplish? And many times, especially in tech, they get lost in the engineering. They're only trying to get the product developed, but there's other parts to this process. There may be in healthcare, you have to get FDA approvals for some things. You need experts to help you that. Marketing, tech support, all of these things go into a go-to-market strategy. And many times, as I like to put it, whether it's my own dental office or consulting, sometimes you have to understand that you are the problem, that you have to get out of the way, or that you need help and it's not your expertise. And then you have to go find those people who you can add to that team to get the best outcomes and bring that product to market. I've lectured as a trio with my friends Paul Feuerstein and John Fluke, and it's 30 years plus, maybe something like that. And I met them online. I live in New Jersey. Paul lives outside of Boston, and John lives outside of Kansas City. And so we would never have crossed paths. But in the early days of the internet, All right. Before the World Wide Web, we were communicating. And then what really happened was we were at a conference in Montreal, and somewhere in the 1990s or so. And John said, between the three of us, there isn't a tech question that we couldn't answer. And that's what got this whole thing started. And once that happened, he was correct. And 30 years later, he's still correct in that assumption. The things are, we've grown with the whole technology. And that's what allows us to stay relevant, in that we are always staying up on what's the latest. So with that, I had these mentors. They turned out to be my best friends, but I didn't know that at the time, that we were all working together trying to do the similar things. And it was basically one for all and all for one. And we would, oh, you did a lecture on whatever technology was there at the end. Can I borrow your slide deck? And the answer was, what was mine was theirs and theirs was mine. And it's still that same way. We function as a group. And sometimes, we do things like any other group. Oh, you do this, I do that. No, I want to do. But that's not it. It's that camaraderie that we've had forever. And if you ever do get a chance to see us lecture, you will see that. It's genuine and authentic. And you can't change that fact. So I've been lucky. Those people who were my mentors, who now I'm on equal footing with, allowed me to do things that I would have struggled to get to otherwise. So Paul has been involved. Paul's ability to have these contacts and get things rolling has to do with his long history in dental publications. He's currently the editor of Dentistry Today. He's been the editor in things before. And in fact, John was also the editor of a magazine for many, many years. They unfortunately folded recently, but now he's morphed that into working on podcasts and other things. And we try and take care of the technologies that are available to us. We were doing video conferencing years before people worried about Zoom and all those other things. And in fact, most of the products and things that we used back then don't even exist anymore. So we were always sitting on that cutting edge. And being on the cutting edge is one thing. Being on the bleeding edge is a whole different game. Oh, where have I been on the bleeding edge? Intraoral cameras, lasers, but currently on the AI stuff. That's really it. I mean, it's just starting to take hold, and I'm getting to see all these different companies that are trying to find different solutions using AI. And I was with a company that unfortunately never brought a product to market, but well before the ones that are now commercial known names in the diagnostic space for dentists looking at x-rays. We were doing product development and actually teaching the AI, setting the gold standards, the data sets for this company well before these other products came to market. So, sitting on that gives you a different perspective of how things are and what things are going on. And sometimes that perspective gets lost on people because they weren't there. So I like to say my gray hair gives me some advantages, all right? I've already seen products come and fail multiple times. And then somebody goes, I think I can make that work. Well, you may be able to make it work, but what were the pitfalls before it? And if you don't know what those are, there's a chance you're going to make the same mistake. And that's part of my consulting, is telling them not to make those mistakes. In any industry, we always have to worry that there are people who are being paid, or we'll call it shilling for somebody. And that alters how they present things and alters how they promote something. And if you're a key opinion leader and you're promoting it based on just what you're being paid to say, that's a different discussion. And it's one that shouldn't happen, but there are people that talk about products even though they're part of the companies. And I happen to be one of those people. But the key to that is full disclosure. I have another lecture coming up where my disclosure slide is huge, all right? I have stock. I'm on advisory boards. I'm on all of this. But you have to understand that even if you are doing those things, that doesn't mean you can't talk about competing products. And what I'd like to try and do is talk about them. Now, I may highlight the company that I'm working for, but I'm going to also tell you there's other products out there. So with that, like anything else, I have to, sometimes I can say things and sometimes I can't. But it's in the end, the only thing I have is my reputation and integrity. If I lose that, nobody's coming to look for me. Nobody wants to hear me talk. And I've been at plenty of lectures where I'm going, okay, this guy keeps mentioning the same company and the same product and everything else, hasn't disclosed anything, and it changes the way you look at what the person is saying. And the part of it is you want to be exposed to all of that stuff. The exposure is what's important. Then ultimately, you have to make the decision for yourself. Do not rely on somebody else to make decisions for you. All right. So you have to do your homework. Homework is important. And I have people come out, what do you use? And it doesn't matter what I use. I may use something for reasons that have nothing to do with a quality of a product or something along those lines. I do it because it fits my needs. And my needs may not be your needs. And your needs are well more important than mine. So understanding your needs then gets to what do I want? And then I can help point you in directions. But ultimately, you have to do the homework to understand what's best for you. Siblings. Okay, so my sister started out as a nurse. Then she went to, she worked for a dialysis company, went to law school, and now does estate law. So that's just been her progression. Oh, and the developmental phase. Oh, we fought like cats and dogs, my sister and I. I probably have a better relationship with my sister now than I did when I was younger. That's for sure. It was not, I think if my mother was still here, she'd be telling you stories that probably nobody wants to hear about how we did not get along. Things change, and it's how you deal with those changes, just like everything else in this world, whether you're running a business or your family. There's always some dysfunction, and it's how do you conquer those devils, as I'll say, and find where you really need to be, because family is important. Oh, leadership. What was my path in there? So I was student council. I think I was vice president of my high school class. Wasn't president, but was vice president. I think I lost that election. But that was one thing. But you know what happens? And I saw this in a lot of cases. When you get to a certain level, especially when you get to something like dental school, a lot of those people never failed. They were always success. They always had success. I didn't always have success. I wasn't the fastest runner. I wasn't the best soccer player or the basketball player, but I always gave it a try. And I watched people melt down when they failed. Failure is something that gives you strength if you can overcome it. And so that was it. In college, I went in a totally different direction. I was part of the, I'll call it the rock and roll experience. I worked on the committee that did rock concerts in college, and I ran the security for the rock concerts. And I wound up working for rock concert promoters on the stage crew, and got to see some of the largest and biggest stars from the 1980s or late 70s through 1990, when I kind of gave up that lifestyle. And at one point, I had a fork in the road. Did I want to go into rock and roll production, or did I want to go to dental school? And the story was, I was in New York City I wouldn't even call it a sound stage. We built a stage for James Taylor's rehearsals in a pier, in a big warehouse on a pier in New York City. And I had known a lot of these guys who were on the tour, and they had just got back from Japan and were completely burned out. And they were going back out on the road after being homeless for a week, and they had another 2 months in front of them. And I just said, that's not the life that I want for me. So that fork in the road happened. I stayed local, still doing rock shows through when I was in college and into dental school. I was stage managing those things. And I'm lucky. I still have friends in that business, from musicians to promoters. And some of them have gone on to very big positions outside of rock and roll, but still in what I'll call some sports and entertainment. And it's pretty funny sometimes when we all get together and look and see where life has taken us. But those were my leadership positions then. In dental school, I don't think I took a leadership position. It was hard enough just getting through it. I didn't need anything more on my plate. Why dental school in the first place? Well, dental school in the first place was because of rock and roll. All right. And you're going to go, where did that come in? So if you wanted to be a physician, you needed a much higher score in your GPA at that point. You needed 3.96s or above. All right. And I was having too much fun doing rock and roll concerts. So with that, between trying to juggle working for rock and roll concerts and trying to earn some money, doing what we were, volunteering to do the rock shows at college, my GPA dipped a little bit underneath that. It was still obviously good enough to get to dental school. But my mother always said that no matter what I did, I was going to land on my feet. I could have been a lawyer. I could have been Wall Street. I could have done, and I still believe I could have been good at any of those things. Is there another path that I would have wanted to take? And that probably is, the answer to that is going to be no, because I'm a fatalist. And with that, fate put me in this path. I helped to guide it in certain ways, but if I didn't join that rock concert thing, maybe I did get to a medical school and I'd be completely different. Or maybe if I did too much of that rock and roll, I would have been not gotten into dental school and I would have become a lawyer or a stockbroker. I don't know. Well, no, I would never have been an addict. I do not have that gene. I am the person who was always the designated driver. I'm not against alcohol. I never took drugs, but that wasn't my thing. And it's funny because I watch friends of mine whose kids have grown up and go, yeah, it was great when they got to drive. They became the designated driver. No, I'm still the designated driver. Not against alcohol. I do consume some, but it's not. I don't have that addictive personality. Teachers or professors that pointed me in a direction, and my answer to that is no. I don't have that teacher that I look back to and go, okay. In fact, most of them, I don't know their names. All right. But here's a funny part to it. So I practice in the same region where I grew up. All right. And I have had my second grade teacher, my third grade teacher, my fifth grade teacher, the man who taught me trumpet. I have had all those people as patients. If you go into high school, I only think I remember one or two of my, outside of patients again, of their, teachers' names. In dental school, you remember them for reasons that weren't necessarily positive. Okay. And yesterday I had another proud moment. I gave a lecture the day before to a bunch of people who wanted to be key opinion leaders and founders and people who wanted to speak better. And he went up and did his pitch in front of a bunch of investors. And he said, you gave me the strength to do this. All right. You can't put money on how that feels. If you want to know that's what drives something, there's a drive there. You can't put money on those things. So I don't have that teacher. I don't have that person that I say that was the one. But the only ones that I have are my two lecture partners, because without them, I wouldn't be sitting here. Yeah, I think a lot of me is internal. As you say, it's in my DNA. But you can teach people things. You may have a good skill, all right? But there's somebody who's always going to have a better skill. And with that, I don't know that I I can teach people to do certain things. That doesn't mean they can do them the way I did it. And it doesn't mean that. It's about the path that you choose and take. So I got my help from people, and each piece of that came from early on. Okay, you were in the gifted class, and you were doing those things. So you were always being pushed. And so you may say that there were teachers that helped push that along. People didn't stop me from doing things. And with that, it goes back to that safety thing. I was in a position where I could try and do things and make mistakes and not necessarily pay the big price for them. As a child, that's really great. As an adult, there's a price you pay for everything. I call it the cost, okay? And when I cost, it can become a whole bunch of different things, but I usually call the total cost time, effort, and money, all right? You only have so much time. You can only give so much effort. And then there's a certain amount of money you either earn or lose because of that. And I don't mean necessarily your vocation. When you take time from one thing, you lose it somewhere else. And so there's a balance that has to happen. But within leadership and doing things, there becomes some people, as they've always said, some people are born into it, some people acquire it, and then some people are forced into it. And there's a different path for each one of them. So when I had this very small office, there were 5 employees, all of whom were great. I called them A employees. And I wish some days I had that back. And I was what I called the benevolent dictator. I let people do their jobs, but when something went wrong, I'd explode. And everybody go, oh my God. And they'd all cower. I'd lose my temper. And then the next day, somebody would go, yeah, he was right, and we need to fix that, and we'd fix it, and we'd go from there. Well, that leadership style served me well for many years. But then we merged my office, and I did some acquisitions and mergers, and now I run a group practice with 20 plus employees. That management style will not work, all right? It can't work in this situation. And I had to completely change my leadership and management style to accommodate that fact. I figured it out for myself, but I also at that point had already started consulting for companies. And I could see what would happen with different management styles and how those founders and those early adopters, people in those companies, would have to do things. And so I learned a lot. I talked about, the MBA guy. I learned from him, and management isn't static either. Management has to change. And so I changed my style. I am not the benevolent dictator who yells and screams. In fact, I don't do that anymore. I find the common path because people have changed. Generations have changed. How we feel. I'm a boomer, as they would say. How you treat other boomers is different than you might treat a Gen Z or a Gen X. Millennials were different and their expectations are different. Being a workaholic was something a boomer just thought you did. All right. Well, when I talk to my kids, there's a work-life balance that they have to have, and they'll pick a job based on that. All right. So you have to change your management style. There's changes that you make in your styles, and it is all part of that learning experience that you have to have. And good leaders learn from their team, and good leaders can then take their team and make them excel. If a leader by himself who just says, I have these people who work around me, isn't a leader. Leaders make the people around them better. As I always like to say, you had many great quarterbacks in the NFL, but how many elevated the people around them? The great ones did. Those great leaders, when they took the field with 2 minutes to go, they took their teams down the field. They didn't do it every time, but when they got in that huddle, every single person on that team knew that they stood a shot. I always said, I didn't come from money. I came from a middle-class background. We didn't want, but we didn't have either. And with that, I have done every crappy job that you can imagine, from cleaning locker rooms to, being a camp counselor, all the way up. I can do them. When I had no money, I used to clean my own office. There is no job below me. If I need to earn money, I find a way to do it. And there's no job I won't do, except illegal. But I won't do. And that came from the beginning. That was instilled in me by my parents, and I instill that in my children, and they have a work ethic that's really positive. Technology that I may have pushed early on, early lasers didn't do exactly what I would have hoped they were doing. I bought a number of them. The funny thing is, they're still in a basement somewhere. I think if I turned them on, they'd still work. They were built better. But they didn't do what we thought they were going to do. Now I jumped 10 or 15 years later, and now there were lasers that did what I wanted to do. Laser technology is wonderful. I think it has its place, but it's not the be all and end all that people thought it was going to be in dentistry. So, I was pushing certain things at that point in my own practice and realized the limitations. And some of those limitations still exist today. I still have lasers. They don't get used the same way that I did because it may not be as efficient. But like everything else, if you have the right tool, it makes your job easier. So I'll pull those lasers out when I need them, but it may not be the first tool I'm looking to use at this point in time. We were talking CAD/CAM, and I said, I remember being in your office with that CEREC one with the plant sitting on top of it. Having you said that, my first intraoral camera was on this big stand with a big TV monitor on it, and it also had a plant on top of it. How do you do what I do? And I had that question asked to me. We did a thing called KOL boot camp yesterday or 2 days ago. And I had people come up to me, more than one, who took this class that we were giving, and John and Paul were with me. And they basically said, do I have what it takes to be a KOL? And the answer is, I can't answer that. I can't answer that you have what it takes, because what it takes is effort. It takes time and dedication. And you have to have all of it. And you can't go, okay, nobody called me, so I haven't done a lecture in 2 years. Does that mean you're done? Or does that mean you have to find a different path? So I can't impart that. What I can impart to the new, what I hope to be the new leaders, the new key opinion leaders. And key opinion leaders are different than influencers. Influencers now are people who run Facebook groups or have followers on Instagram, and they have an audience, but that doesn't make them understand products, techniques that would help companies develop things. They have an audience. That's all they have. Now, there are some KOLs who have an audience and are influencers, but a KOL in and of themselves is the ultimate influencer, because that person can not only influence a company in a direction or a product or a technique, they can bring people with them and elevate the entire profession. One's media, the other is not. You have to pay your dues. That's part of it. And that's the time, effort, and you have to balance that because it takes time from your office, from your family. And I did this the other day and I said it, and every true KOL in that room agreed. Your entire family, your entire support network goes, why are you doing this? You could make more money sitting at home in your office than you do going out on the road to these meetings and lectures. And guess what? They're right. You don't do it for the money. You do it because it's good for you. It's good for the profession. It's part of you giving back. And then there's certain parts of your ego that get stroked with that too. So I understand the whole concept, but it takes a lot to become a key opinion leader. It takes a lot to maintain your status as a key opinion leader. And it comes with some sacrifice to be a key opinion leader. I'm making the effort because most of us back in the day didn't have the people to kind of guide us and lead us and tell us there's a path to doing this. You found it on your own. I was lucky. I found John and Paul. All right. And I didn't pay all my dues. I've never said I did. All right. I always give credit to people who do things that and I can't take credit for. So they helped elevate me, but I didn't stay here for 30 years because they helped elevate me. At a certain point, you become that person. All right. So I remember when they walked me around exhibit halls and introduced me to people. And I tell the story of John one day. I said, John, you got to come meet this person and see this product. And he looked at me strangely that time, because all of a sudden I flipped the script. And I went from we were friends, but he went from being that little bit of a mentor to now, oh my God, he's now my equal. All right. He's doing what I do. And, we have a lot of those stories and they're fun to tell, but that's the reality. I had some help. Nobody does it by themselves. You talked about earlier, my mother, who encouraged me when I took the TV apart and couldn't back together and had to call the repairman, from those kind of things. So the encouragement is what's important. And the internal part to that is how you feel. And when I get that person yesterday saying, you helped give me the courage to get in front of a room of people, you know what? There's no money. It makes it worthwhile. It's internal, and you get joy out of that. And that's part of being a human being. And real leaders are also human beings.